Well, I'll go ahead and start. I will mention this just a little bit. I'll give you a warning of who I am. I'm Dr. Kevin Crow. I'm a professor of history at the University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma. Prior to that, I had teaching positions at 6 other universities in 3 different states. I've done this a long time. One of the things that I also oversee is student teachers. I've trained some of the student teachers in social studies. I've done that here. I've done that in Arkansas, other states that I've worked at. So I have a little bit of experience about that. But not, just so you don't take me too seriously, I'll put a little thing that'll kind of bring me down a few levels. A few years ago, when I worked at the University of Kentucky, I had a friend who worked for the State Department there in education, and the state of Kentucky at that time was going through education reform, which is just another way of saying they're going to spend more money and make it worse. But he worked for this one guy that the state of Kentucky had hired to bring in to kind of reform things and all this, and they brought him in for some New Englander who had an Ivy League school, so they thought, oh, we'll bring him in, which doesn't, we'll talk about credentials later and see if that really matters or not. But anyway, my friend had to go with him all around the state of Oklahoma to talk about this education reform. So this guy was real arrogant, and they had a town meeting in Appalachia. It was in eastern Kentucky, and he gets up there and he starts talking about this and throwing out all these education terms and blah blah this and blah blah that. And finally, when they got finished, it was an open forum, and he said, "Does everybody have any questions?" And so this one guy stood up in the back, he had his overalls on and everything. He says, "I got a question for you." He said, "Are you a real doctor, or are you just one of them talking doctors?" So anyway, so having said that, just keep in mind as I give you this stuff that the source is, I'm still just a talking doctor. Anyway, so if we think about what's happened over the last year and a half, you know, the riots in major cities and many smaller cities was the new norm throughout the summer of 2020, you know, the previous summer. In some places, these riots were a nightly occurrence for over 100 consecutive days. You saw this in Oregon and places. During much of the summer of 2020, you couldn't even dine out in an outdoor cafe in the nation's capital or large cities like New York, even in fashionable neighborhoods, without some violent mob forcing you to participate in some Maoist self-denunciation ritual or something, right? We saw this over and over again. Law enforcement personnel were being assassinated in their cars or on the beat at a rate exponentially higher than the killing of unarmed suspects that allegedly sparked the violence in the first place, okay? Yeah. And the press remained mostly silent about those murders. Right. Random attacks on the very old, the very young, and other innocents, as well as the constant destruction of private property, continued to skyrocket in our major cities. It has continued to skyrocket in our major cities. We now have, this report will come out within the next month from the federal government, that the murder rate has increased the highest this year than in any other year since they've kept records, okay? So again, this stuff continues. Images of our founding fathers, Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, as well as other American heroes, by the way, both Democrat and Republican heroes, right? FDR, Frederick Douglass, Jackson, the list goes on and on, not to mention monuments of graves of soldiers who died to protect our lives and our freedom were desecrated and throughout the nation. And all of this was even before Biden became president, okay? We won't even talk about it. I need to say what's happened since then, right? We've become the laughingstock of the world. Even the French, our first and longest ally, have recalled their ambassador, okay? And what has come of our respect for our inalienable rights that has defined us as Americans since our very founding, right? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Government, by the way, didn't grant these rights. They were given to us by God and by nature and nature's God, right? I mean, that's Declaration of Independence, right from there. Government was instituted by man to defend these rights, not to grant them. But how can a government defend a people's rights when it won't even defend its national borders? Yes. How is abandoning scores of American citizens to adhere to a terrorist's timeline defending the rights of life? Right? How is infringing on the right of assembly and the freedom of speech defending liberty? And how is keeping businesses shut down month after month defending one's right to the pursuit of happiness? Now, luckily, this state hasn't done that to the degree that other states have, but nevertheless. And so the answer is, what has happened? Now, I'll give you kind of two answers to the question, and I'm glad that JT spoke before me, because that'll save me a lot of time on one of them. And one of them is a nefarious cause. And I'm going to look at that a little bit in just a second. This will be Marxist, other troublemakers. There is another thing, though, that I would mention, too. And this is a problem that existed in large societies even before Marxism existed. And that is the problem of scope. Once institutions become so large and powers unto themselves and can isolate themselves from the people they serve, it's over. And that's existed throughout time. You look at the collapse of the Roman Empire. It becomes so centralized. You micromanage things so much, society falls. So there are two reasons. One would be that. The other is that there are people actively, like you said, trying to bring it down. Now, let me talk about that second part first, the people actively trying to bring it down. As many of you are aware, and I know in this audience people will be aware of this person, Cleon Skousen, right, who wrote a work titled The Naked Communist, Exposing Communism and Restoring Freedom. I outlined 45 goals for undermining the United States. This would have been in the early 60s. And in 1963, his 45 communist goals were included in the congressional record under unanimous consent. Republicans and Democrats said this needs to be read in there as a warning of the dangers that the communists presented to American society. Now, the full list you can access. I'm not going to go over the full list. You can access. But since our focus today is on education, I do think it's worthwhile to look at a few of these and how they relate to education and or the shaping of our culture, which, by the way, is what education mainly is. That's the purpose of education, is the shaping of the culture. Even decent people have forgotten this. Even well-meaning people think, well, maybe it's just job training. No, that's something else. That's training. I'm not saying you shouldn't get people ready for jobs, but that's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is the preservation of a civilization. That's the first thing. You should do both. You should get them ready for jobs and that. Okay, I want to stress this. Now, so let's look at these. Number 17 on those 45 lists was get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. There we go. That's what we just talked about, right? Soften the curriculum. Get control of Teachers Association. Put the party line in textbooks. If you look at any of the major textbooks corporations, yeah, you would be shocked. Any of them. Including the ones that come out of Texas, any of them. That's why in the courses that I teach, we never use a textbook. We just use primary sources. That's it. Anyway.
That's good.
Now, the other one is gain control of all student newspapers. A long time ago that happened. Use student rights to foment public protest against programs or organizations which are under communist attack. By the way, look at what happens to speakers. They don't even have to be conservative speakers. They can be moderate or just not liberal enough speakers on major campuses. Again, you don't see this much in this state as much as other places, but it'll come, and see what happens. Shout it down, right? This is what you have. Infiltrate the press. Get control of book reviews, assignments, editorial writing, and policy-making positions. By the way, I would also add something else. This wasn't that big in 1963. Now it's major. Getting control of accrediting organizations. And I'm going to talk about that extensively and how that takes place and why that's important and how it actually hamstrings us even when we try to come up with state provisions. So I'll come back to that later. Gain control of key positions in radio, TV, motion pictures. Break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. Now, if you don't think that that relates to education, then you're not aware of the types of things that are being taught in certain school districts, well, many across the nation, some in this state. And not just in sex education, so-called sex education courses. discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. Let me talk about this. One of the jobs is I go around and I'll observe student teachers. Okay, so I'm in a lot of schools all over the state. I'm not going to mention which ones on this because that's kind of private, but I will mention this. So I was in one last week. Last week was Constitution Day. And I went to one school where that's what they were studying. And they were going over a lesson on this. And the textbook and the little PowerPoints they were using, the stuff provided to the teachers, basically we're talking about how the Constitution's a living document. One-sided, kept going, all of this. Didn't talk about, let's see what the founders had in mind. That wasn't the approach. How, as things change, we have to change. Okay? And then later in that same class, of course, I have to keep my mouth shut. I'm just observing. By the way, this was not my student teacher doing this. I want to stress this, okay? But one of them was talking about, oh yeah, well think about, how there's different powers for the feds and for the states and all that. And that's why if the federal people give a directive that you have to listen to that because they're higher up. Okay, first of all, that's a really great, a really good description of a monarchy.
Right.
Yes.
That's not what we established.
That's right.
The order is in the other way. You have some rules that the feds are granted, but if they're not granted that, they don't have it.
That's right.
And people forget this. Your local sheriff can kick out the FBI if he wants to. That's how much power locals have. And by the way, even the courts, even the liberal courts have upheld that notion and stuff. I was, by the way, not our guest, it wasn't you, okay, this is somebody more local, but there was a state representative not long ago, and they were talking about the McGirt case. And afterwards, and I didn't try to put him on the spot, I went just up to him one-on-one, and I said, what you need to do about the McGirt case is, first of all, our U.S. senators, the job of a U.S. senator is to look after the interest of a state. Senators are not big congressmen. They have different jobs. Your representative is to look after what you want. The U.S. senators are to look after the state's interest. I said, the fact is, our two U.S. senators should be leading the fight on the McGirt case. What you should do as a state representative is get with your buddies, and the state house in this state should petition the state house and the state senate, the legislature together, should petition our two U.S. senators, do something about the McGirt case. And he says, well, I said, that's the way the Constitution's set up. Well, I don't care about that. That's just not the way it works. Okay, if you can't follow the Constitution, you take that oath, well, you're committing perjury. You just need to step down.
Right.
The fact is, our state legislature are the bosses of our U.S. senators. It doesn't work the other way around. That's just an aside. Sorry, but the reason I point that out, how do even some of our legislators get this notion?
Right.
Look at how they were educated.
Right.
Same thing.
Yes.
The way we teach the Constitution. It's not taught.
It's
not taught. And you cannot understand the U.S. Constitution unless you understand the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution is basically a format to deliver on the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that's given to us by God. Or if you're an atheist, by nature. Either way, it doesn't come from us. Because if it comes from government, what does that mean?
They can take it away.
They can take it away. Well, one of the things you have, and I'm going to skip some of these down so we can get the major stuff in just a second. But one of them is, again, let's see, and I'm going to hit this. Another one of these is, belittle all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history on the ground that it was only a minor part of the big picture. That's one of the things now we move away from American history or American exceptionalism or anything like that. And by the way, when I say American exceptionalism, I don't mean we are genetically superior. It's not like we're, it's not this. It's not like we as Americans, okay. No, American exceptionalism, we turn toward a direction and say, we'll do this. We recognize where our rights come from. It's not because we're genetically predetermined to be exceptional. Okay? We recognize that. And what we do now is when you have classes on the Revolutionary War or whatever. Well, that's tied into that period of revolution, and they somehow start bringing together the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, all together. There is a difference. There is a difference. If you look at the French Revolution, they will tell you where the rights come from. Government and the consent of the majority. That's not what the American Revolution was about.
Right. That's right.
Those rights are already there. And if we can't teach that, what good is any civics course?
Exactly.
Anyway, civics courses have become basically on how to manipulate peoples, not how to follow what we have been given, given to us by God and basically passed down by our forefathers. Okay. Now, anyway, let me skip through all these for a second. If you notice all these little things that I read from the 45 communist goals, notice how very few of them are political in nature. Very few. Most of them actually are basically cultural. And the reason why is, you see, this is a problem. Politics doesn't shape culture. Politics follows culture. I mean, it just does. You change the culture, then politics follows. And what's happened is at our national level and elsewhere, this is something that Republican leadership hasn't figured out. They're out there playing golf. They haven't figured this out. And they'll even say, well, if we want to win elections, stay away from those cultural statements. Don't say that, right? Well, what they haven't figured out is while Republicans are really good at winning elections, these same Republicans have lost the cultural war. And make no mistake about it, just because they refuse to fight doesn't mean a war hasn't taken place. They just lost it, okay? Now, did you ever think for a moment about civilization? Because that's what education's about. It's about preserving civilization, keeping it going. There was a Spanish philosopher, Jose Ortega de Gasset. He wrote in the 1920s, and he basically talked about how modernity is in danger because people take everything for granted. We take civilization for granted. We take our rights for granted. We take everything that's just there, just like the air. In other words, I can come in, I can turn these lights on because that's just nature. Nobody thinks about how difficult it is to organize an infrastructure, to protect a society, to get things to operate. And once you start thinking that this is just nature itself, it's over. People just expect. And society's gone. And so he said this. He says, civilization is nothing else than the attempt to reduce force to being the ultima ratio. That means the last resort. We are now beginning to realize this with startling clearness. Because direct action, by the way, that term direct action, pay attention during those riots you had last summer. They were taking direct action. Okay, he says, we are now beginning to realize with startling clearness because direct action consists in inverting the order and proclaiming violence as the prima ratio, that is the first option, or strictly the unica ratio, the only option. It is the norm which proposes the annulment of all norms, which suppresses all intermediate processes between our purpose and its execution. It is the Magna Carta of barbarism. In other words, once we forget what civilization's about, following the rules, boom, it just becomes power, raw power, and nothing else.
Right.
Now, mob rule, basically mob rule, which again, Jose Ortega de Gasset defined mob rule. He says, when the mob acts on its own, it does so in the only way it knows how to. It lynches. And that's what we're moving to. He goes on, he says, civilization is not just there, it is not self-supporting, it is artificial and requires the artisan and the artisans. If you want to make use of the advantages of civilization, but are not prepared to concern yourself with the upholding of civilization, you are done.
I don't get it.
Well, what he's basically saying, think about all the stuff we have right now. Even the stuff we have, it's because we innovate. We have the freedom to come up with stuff. If you don't understand the type of system that has allowed us to do this, we put the man on the moon. The Soviets didn't. No other society did. It's because we are unique. But if we don't appreciate what's unique about the American experience, if we don't teach that, even if you don't care about freedom, well, you like air conditioning? You like meds? You're not going to have those things either if civilization falls. So even if you're not a person, we should care about freedom. But even if you're not one of these, even the people who think that government's just about, oh, well, I'll fund this guy because he'll give me this little break, or, give me government business doing this, and they think that's it. If they keep playing that game, well, eventually they might be wealthy, but they're going to be the lapdogs to an overarching government. And once you don't have that freedom to create, you don't have the freedom to pursue goals, civilization will collapse. That's what happened to the Soviet Union. Collapsed. Now, you're beginning now, hopefully, to understand why it was during the Cold War the communists were interested in destroying our cultural institutions, such as our educational system, as much as they were in destroying our military and our political institutions. The communists weren't the only ones to figure this out, though, that the key to defeating their enemies is to attack one's culture as opposed to just their military and stuff. Why? 2,500 years ago, you have the great Chinese strategist Sun Tzu. And Sun Tzu said this. He says, "Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." It's not about war. The key thing is you break the enemy's morale, okay? How do you do this? You create division. You sow discord among people. You make sure that the very foundation of society is not secure. You create chaos. It is not simply by defeating armies in the field, but by throwing one's enemy's way of life, that is their society, their institutions, into chaos, that one gains victory. Thus for Sun Tzu, he said, to win 100 victories in 100 battles is not the acme of skill. To subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill. The greatest victory is that which requires no battle. If America collapses, it'll collapse from within. Then you've already defeated them. Okay? Now, if an enemy can break the heart and soul of America, if an enemy can undermine our attachment to the American ideals, right? Our reverence for our rights of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and our understanding from whence these rights came, well, then and only then can an enemy bring down this nation. That's what's happened. Now, you can start seeing now, hopefully, why the state of education in this country should be a concern to all of us, not just people who have kids in school.
Absolutely.
Now, when you think of education, what word comes to mind? Well, people think schools, particularly they think public schools. It can be. Make no mistake about it, public schools do play a key role in education and shaping our society. But so too does the family, or at least it should. I mentioned how earlier, about these communist goals. One of the communist goals was discredit the family as an institution. And this should come as no surprise. Marx was very upfront about that. In the Communist Manifesto, he boldly calls for the abolition of the family. Check it out. That's his main goal. Get rid of the family. Because once you get rid of the family, well, then there's only one thing to look to.
Yep.
That's it. That's his goal. That was his goal. And he brings that up over and over again. And this is why I maintain that communists always have been and always will be enemies of civilization. Not just American civilization, but civilization, period.
Yes.
Now, family is key to education. Any educational system that undermines the role of family in a society is an enemy of civilization. By the way, most public school teachers will tell you that if you want to improve education, by the way, most public school teachers aren't saying their number one thing is lack of pay.
Right.
They'll tell you if you want to improve education, start with the parents. Send us disciplined school kids, because we're no longer in a lot of places allowed to discipline them.
Right.
Start with the family. And you can just ask public school teachers, even liberal public school teachers, they'll tell you the same thing. Start with the family. Now, in addition to the role of parents of children who attend public schools play in our educational systems, families also play a key role, obviously, in homeschooling. And although most government bureaucrats, as well as leaders in the private sector, don't think about it, homeschools play an important role in our educational system. In truth, our educational system, that key support of our civilization, includes not only public schools, but private schools, that would be religious affiliated and secular based, and homeschools. All of that is part of the education system. All of that is. Now, before you jump to conclusion and think, well, you know, he's just another rabid libertarian wanting to dismantle public schools, let me assure you, I'm not. Okay, I'm not. I don't want to dismantle public schools. In fact, you know, I've worked most of my life at public universities. I've spent the overwhelming majority of my career teaching in public education, all of this. I will say this, I have a foot in all camps. My own kids, we homeschool. But here's the thing, I can do that. Some people can't. And the way it is right now, for the foreseeable future, probably forever, most kids will still have to go to public school. I mean, it's just a reality. Now, I do say, you know, if you're capable, do homeschool if you can, right? That's great. Do whatever's best for your child, whatever you think is best. But here's the thing, it's not a good enough argument to say, let's just push this. It's finally time for everybody to pull out. Because, and then don't worry about the rest. Because the problem is, if you do that, if that's all we're concerned with, the overwhelming majority are still going to public schools.
Right.
And that's what's going to shape society.
Right.
They're always going to be the majority. And so, the fact is, even if you homeschool, or if you have no children, what goes on in public schools is of a concern to you. And make no mistake about it, they are still your schools. You still pay for them. You are still part of the community. They're still your schools as well. And so that's important. And so if they fail, it's a problem. It's a problem. Remember what Reagan said, and I'm going to repeat this again later. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States where men were free. That's the danger. Now, what I want to do now is I want to talk a little bit about what we can do, okay, about how we can work on education. By the way, I want to stress this. This fight is not only about, again, public schools or homeschooling. As I said, it also includes private schools. If you think, well, I've got to send my kid to a university, I guess, because he wants to do this and this. By the way, if your kid can do a job that doesn't need a university job, I mean, curriculum, more power to them. Different answers. Every child has a different inclination. And let me assure you, plumbers make more than I do. Okay, so again, I'm not saying push a kid to be a plumber. Maybe their inclination's not that, but if it is, more power to them. But even plumbers have to know about our Constitution and where our rights come from. Sure. Okay. Anyway, going back to this, I always start with what I know. I don't try to attack other people. Okay. So I'll be upfront, and I don't usually talk about religion or mine and stuff, but my faith, but I will. I'm a member of the Church of Christ. I always will be. Okay, that's just who I am. Okay, and stuff, and I believe and stuff. So what I'll start with is actually, even in this state, a public institution that's Church of Christ based, and how it wrestles with this problem. And again, if anybody knows other members of the Church of Christ, we're very conservative for the most part. But Oklahoma Christian, as part of its focus on diversity, Oklahoma Christian recently hosted a speaker who encouraged her clients, and when I say recently, it's been about a year and a half ago, her clients to read or view works that include a project linking the United States Founding Fathers to slavery and other works that criticize us as portraying basically all white people as racist. Okay, what else? Imago Dei is Latin for image of God, and it's one of the things you'll see on Oklahoma Christian's site. But at Oklahoma Christian University, the college has launched an Imago Dei program in which Dei, D-E-I, has another meaning. It's shorthand for diversity, equity, and inclusion. By the way, one of the things I do in my own classes is I try to teach people not to just take people's word for it. I even say be skeptical of what I'm saying. So I'll tell you the same things that I'll tell my students. Go look it up. Go to their website. Research this. You know, type in Oklahoma Christian and the Dei program and all of this. Now, as part of that program, the school hosted a consultant, Jen Fry, to lead a faculty and staff training session. Go to her website and see what she's all about. Fry described her business as, quote, a social justice education firm that uses a conversation to educate and empower those within athletics through an academics and athletics, through an anti-racist lens on the issues of race, inclusion, intersectionality, diversity, and equity. Again, check out her website. Now, for those interested, and she said she was interested in rescuing theology from white supremacy. And Fry recommends the Reclaiming of Theology. She has a Reclaiming of Theology podcast. You can look this up. And the host of the podcast, a person by the name of Brandy Miller, says, there are so many things to reclaim from our theology. White supremacy, patriarchy, misogyny, capitalism, homophobia, ableism, and more. On her Twitter feed, Miller describes herself as someone helping Jesus people suck less. There you go. An Oklahoma Christian hired her as a consultant. By the way, just as, if you keep a number here of the different 45 rules that the communists had or plans to overthrow America, number 27 was infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious crutch. There we go. The reason I point that out is when we talk about watching education, and we're going to talk about what you can do in public education in just a second, but you also need to pay attention to private education. Mm-hmm. If you're sending your kids to these schools, you better watch what they're doing. You better find out who the Board of Regents is. Okay? This is important. If you're homeschooling, you better do some research on those book companies, things of that nature. Okay, let me keep going. Now, so what can we do about all this? Well, first of all, let me start off by addressing those who might want to improve their homeschooling experience. And I'm going to talk about everything. I'm going to talk about homeschooling, and I'm going to talk about public schools. I'm going to talk about all this, okay? Already there's available to many people co-ops. I would say get connected with the co-op. Do some research on a co-op. Get connected. That will ensure that your kids, you're raising them at your house, but it also gives them interaction with other like-minded people. It gives them a chance to develop social skills and stuff. People always say, well, the problem with homeschooling is they don't develop those, you keep them sheltered and stuff. Somebody mentioned that to me when they found out I was homeschooling my kid. They said, you're keeping them sheltered. I said, they hang around me. Okay, so if people know me, they'll know I'm not very sheltered. But anyways, okay, so anyway, going back to this, but get involved in a co-op. There's also, we can work on the development of new resources that parents can find readily accessible, parents and homeschoolers alike. By the way, I'll say this, and I'm not going to talk much about this because it's in progress. I'm actually working with some people who were former students of mine who have gone into the film industry, and we're trying to work on maybe putting together some video courses, both that homeschool children can use, but watch with their parents, that help get them ready for when they go to college. So anyway, I may talk about that more if somebody has a question later, but things of this nature, this is something else we can do. Now, the other thing though that we need to look at is we need to look at what about public schools? What can be done here, okay? And this is where it gets to be dicey because it all comes down with holding people accountable, right? In other words, how do you do that? And this is a problem. One of the solutions that we have to have for public schools is you have to clean up the assessment process. Now you'll notice the title of my little topic was The Strangling of Public Education, Too Many Regulations, Too Many Mandates, Minimal Transparency, Ineffectual Accountability. One of the most effective tactics that Marxists like to use is to weigh down effective institutions until they're broken. And then you just have to turn to the state. We see this in healthcare already. Weigh it down. Weigh it down. If you can break the healthcare system, then what will everybody cry out for? Oh, let government take it over. Okay? If we can break the education system in every state, people will say what? You'll have politicians say, send the feds in. By the way, that's what Marxists want. I will say this, ineptitude and size is also leading to that problem. It's not just Marxist, just the fact that it's becoming so big and people make so much money from it that itself makes it overwhelming. Now, the way I would start with when we're talking about accreditation, or we're talking about improving education, is to ask one question. To whom is public education answerable? Who is it? Who should it be?
It's supposed to be the parents and the public.
That's it. It's supposed to be the parents in the district.
Well, yeah.
That's key. But now think about now, to whom is public education answerable to? And then I'm going to give you the problem. Everybody.
Oh.
Everybody. First of all, like you said, there are teacher unions who will shape things, but there's also corporations that will shape things, wanting to make money off of textbooks or whatever. But you also have federal mandates. You have state mandates. You have accreditation organizations. By the way, I want to talk about accreditation organizations anyway, because here's what's happened. Even if you're a private school, and let's say you're a private college or whatever, or a private high school, and your child graduates and they have a diploma from that. And let's say it's a private high school and they have a diploma and they're going to apply for a university. They'll say, well, who's that accredited by? Or if you're at a university, right? A private university, and they'll say, well, who's that accredited by? Now, you may have the best education possible, but if some accrediting organization doesn't give its okay, oh, well, that doesn't hold up. That's a fake university, or that's a fake school. The problem is, who are our so-called experts? I'll give you an example of this. This is just an aside. I brought one of these. I think I got it here. But there's a guy by the name of David Levering Lewis, okay? The reason I point him out, my actual area of history is ancient and medieval history, okay? And this guy wrote a book called God's Crucible, Islam and the Making of Europe. And basically what his statement was, Europe would have been better off if the Islamic conquest would have taken Europe. That basically they were far ahead of everybody and all of that, okay? And his stuff was on medieval Spain. Well, the fact is, if you look at it, it's not that all of a sudden all this great knowledge that came in the Renaissance was reintroduced to the West by via the Islamic world. What people forget is this: the Islamic conquest also cut off Western Europe from much of the Byzantine East. It's separated in the first part, okay? And the guy, when you actually look at his book, you're thinking, wait a minute, how did this guy even get published? But nevertheless, what happens, if you look through his book, he makes all these comments, despite the fact that, again, if you look through his bibliography, and you can look through this, it reveals a woeful lack of familiarity with the main primary sources in the field. He relies instead on large part on secondary ones, and the vast majority of which are in English or translated in English. In other words, he doesn't even look at primary documents that much. You'll look, there's some that may make references, but there's one thing you don't see. You don't see anything in Spanish or any primary documents from medieval Spain. Yet what's his book on? Medieval Spain. But he's recognized as the authority. In fact, what we see is President Barack Obama awarded him with the National Humanities Medal. So I got my National Humanities Medal, I'm an expert. This happens all the time. This happens all the time. But when you have people that have these credentials,
Right.
well, then they can say, well, that's who's on the board of this accrediting institution. There you go. We can see the tyranny of experts. You can think right now, for example, even what's going on with the COVID epidemic.
Right.
Now, I'm not doubting that Fauci's not one of the world's great experts in virology. I won't argue that, okay? Very well may be. But here's the thing. This is not only a crisis that involves a virus, it's a crisis that involves the economy,
Right.
legal,
Right.
people's rights. It's very complicated. And to turn it over to one person,
Right.
that's a problem.
Right.
Well, accrediting organizations are the same way. Once you take over an accrediting organization, you can, and once you get the right people on those boards, they can determine what tests you're going to have to pass, what type of things we're looking for. And that is one of the things that leads us to how the stuff that that James Taylor was talking about makes it into the schools. How so? Well, let me give you an example. I'll use it from mine that I had to go to. We have federal money, so federal money requires us to do training, be trained on like Title IX, things of this nature. There are only so many organizations as you can get you can bring a speaker in, or you can do an online one. Online's cheaper. Again, notice it's a business too. If you bring a speaker in, then you're paying them, who knows, $60,000, whatever. Okay, so I will give credit to our university. I will give them credit, although I'm going to hit this. They did try to look at ones that were least controversial, and they went with EverFi, which of them is still it. Yet, what types of stuff do I have to be trained in now? Like intersectionality that we talked about earlier. An example, by the way, this comes straight from the things that I'd be trained by. A young white woman may experience sexism because of her gender. And though she may share female identity with a Hispanic woman who is 62 years old, she would not share the added experience of racism, ageism, and ableism by virtue of her race, age, and disability. So we have to learn how to judge each little person by that. That's what I'm supposed to do now when I work with students, right? Yeah, and then what other types of stuff we have? We have, these are straight from here again. I pulled some of these other ones. So what do we have to learn? We have to learn how to be an ally. What does that mean? Allies acknowledge unearned privileges and work to eliminate or distribute them to others. They are committed to taking action against social injustice in which, in their own sphere of influence, and understand the connections between different forms of social injustice. Okay, let's go a little further. Allied trait. Allies recognize that unlearning oppressive beliefs and actions is a lifelong process, not a single event. They act against social injustice. And so what types of things do we talk about here? Well, let's see. I got to be careful what I can put and what I can't. Some of these I'm not allowed to mention. Oh, here's one. Tolerance. How are we going to define tolerance? Well, first, there's simple tolerance, which means the bare minimum of not harming others whose views or behavior you find objectionable. By the way, that's a good one, and that's where we usually stop.
Right,
that was called being polite.
Right.
We used to have something called manners. Okay. The second is civility, in which politeness and courtesy is emphasized. Again, that's good. Here's the other one. This is what they're pushing for. The third is acceptance, in which individuals try to actively emphasize with and understand those who hold opposing views. So the notion is not tolerance, not to treat people to be tolerant, but you need to accept. Accept. So that's, again, how does that get in? Well, again, we can make all the rules we want at the state legislature, saying, well, don't teach this, don't teach that. But if university has to maintain its accreditation, and you have to demonstrate you've done this, this, and this, you see who are opposed? State mandates, accrediting organizations, feds, you're torn apart. You're trying to please everybody. And what happens when you try to please everybody? Who can you please?
No one.
No one. This happens at all levels, okay? So this is something, that we basically see. As I mentioned, well, let's talk about secondary levels then. Does it get any better? Sorry, I've got so much stuff here. I don't want to lose everything. I'm trying to, I was going to bring some stuff that's asked at our state level. I lost it. Don't worry about that. But right now we're in the PPAT, which is performance-based, which again is better than what we used to have. But nevertheless, look at the onerous things that are placed on teachers that they have to do. So right now I have student teachers out, and I said, what do you guys think? And they said, it's horrible. They said, can you send me a list of what you have a problem with? And they wrote me, these are my own students right now, and they said this. They said, my main issue with the PPAT are that they ask for too many detailed explanations. And by the way, PPAT is not one of these, it's not one of these Marxist ones, it's just another, they're asking students to demonstrate, or teachers to demonstrate stuff. It says, and it really takes away from us getting to focus on connecting with the students and actually learning how to teach them. I also have got the feeling that they expect everybody to have a perfect classroom where every lesson goes super well, and they don't realize that we're busy trying to help students. There are students in my class that read on a 3rd grade level. She teaches 11th grade. So I am more focused on creating lessons to help them instead of creating lessons that fit very detailed with what the PPAT is asking for. It's like they don't realize that there are real students that need to learn, not just experiments for us to use. Okay? So again, You're always having to do this. How are you supposed to teach? Keep going. I could read the other ones. Let me give you my own experience.
What is PPHE again?
That's the new test that basically looks at performance based. It's what all high school teachers
Is
will
that
have to be based
outcome-based
on.
education?
Supposedly, but I'm going to get to real outcome based in just a second,
Okay.
instead of what they call outcome based.
Okay.
But again, this is one of the things that that we have here. Let me show you something else again when we talk about what people are answerable for. Again, state and everything. Let me show you mine. This is a university. Remember, university professors have more freedom than high school ones. But every year, our school, because of the state, asks, okay, you've got to do an annual report, write up your stuff for the year.
Wow.
Let me show you one of these. There's 2020.
Mm.
Just so you know, there's 2019,
Mm.
2018. I've done these for 15 years. They're this high. I can show you every single year.
What is that for?
It's a report that we have to give. We're required to give this by the regents on what we do every year. Now, this
Wow.
isn't my only report. I have 6-month education reports. Every once in a while, they have to show, well, you're in charge of the program, do a program report. Now, don't forget, I still teach 200 students a semester as well. Okay? But these are the stuff they weigh us down with. By the way, when do I have time to do this? Simple. So-called Christmas break, my wife can tell you, in the last 10 years, I have been home 1 day for Christmas. I hate Christmas more than the Grinch. Anyway, that's what we do. So again, then we'll have things that say, well, let's come up with another way to fix this. And I'm going to show you how even good ideas end up strangling everything. If you have too many people you have to be answerable to. A few years ago, they had what was called the Resident Year Teacher Program, okay? And it was going to be a mentorship to where, you have the first-year teachers, and you'll have a university professor, their mentor teacher, and the superintendent. They'll all get together, or the principal, and we'll help mentor that person. Sounds good on paper, yeah? Oh, this is what we're looking for. Okay, here's the thing. So each one of those had to go 4 times to visit. Often they put them an hour away from me. You've got to be there first, observe the class, that's an hour. Then while you're there, you've got to talk a little bit after, that's another hour. So you figure an hour to get there, 2 hours there, an hour back, minimally. And this is if you don't get there and there's something going on that day, you have to make the trip back. So if everything worked perfect, I had 4 of these plus 2 student teachers 1 year, that'd be 4 in a semester. You can do the math. 4 times 4, okay, times 6, you're getting to 96 hours of work if everything works well. And that doesn't require when I do the paperwork. If everything works well, 96 hours of work in a single semester before I teach a class, grade a paper, or do anything else.
Oh my
This
God.
is why people are leaving education, why teachers are sunk. Because the problem is, every time we say we're going to fix it, we add something.
Right.
We add something.
Right.
We add something. And what I'll say is, if you want to know why your kids aren't learning, it's not because the teachers are bad. They've got to do this first. These are mandatory. This is the problem with micromanaging. Now, and again, this is why I won't, when it's just a nightmare.
Right.
It's a nightmare. Now, so how do you do this? How can we turn this around?
Right, because it seems like it's not turnable.
Let me give you a couple. Okay, let me give you a couple of things. First of all, universities, and then I'll do K through 12. Universities, what we should do basically is look at judging people by outcome based. That
We
is,
should?
that's it. Let me explain what I mean by outcome based.
I've
No.
done that.
No, let me explain what I mean. You have a different definition.
Okay.
Here's what I mean. Ask, what percentage of your students are graduating? That's one. Okay? What percentage of your students are, if you want to say going to grad school, law school, whatever, what are they doing after graduation? How employable are they? And make those statistics public.
Okay.
That's what I mean.
Okay.
Do you understand? Literally what literally matters.
Uh-huh.
Because you ask, what is a college for? What's a university for? Show me what you're producing.
Okay. I get that.
You understand that?
Yeah, that's a lot
That's
better
what
than
I
what
call,
I'm
yeah, well,
thinking.
they've changed the meaning of outcome, okay? Theirs was, oh, they learned this checklist.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
saying, what's the actual results?
Yeah.
That's one thing. The other thing you have to do is this. Who kind of runs the school? Well, ideally it's the regents, but who appoints them? Well, governor. Now, I'm not knocking regents, there's a few that can be good, but here's the thing. Usually the person they appoint, it's kind of like an honorary thing. Now, they're supposed to run it, but they go and vote. Most regents, most places will be like mushrooms. Do you know the thing about mushrooms? Kept in the dark and fed excrement. And so I'll give you an example. At one university I've had to work at, I'm not going to mention which one, but I can back this up, I keep everything. People always talk about, oh, tenure, blah, 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 let's get rid of tenure and all that. You can get rid of tenure people, that's not a problem. Here's the thing. They say, oh, the professors look out for each other. No, professors don't want to be thought of as lazy. They don't want to be thought of as not doing their job. And so they'll go after somebody who's bringing things down because it puts more work on them, if nothing else. And so, for example, when people are brought before us, we'll have something, and you know, this has happened, I've seen this happen, where they'll say no to tenure, no to a promotion, and yet these people are still promoted. Now, here's the thing, and again, I've worked at several universities, so that doesn't always happen, but it does happen. Okay, but the thing is this, when we're on a committee like that, we are timed by the computer how much we read to make sure we know what we're talking about, to make sure we've looked over all the evidence. You following me? Is a regent who makes this decision, are they timed? Do we even know they've looked at any argument? Do they see what we've recommended and why? Maybe some. So what I'm saying is this, that process has to be changed. It's good to have an independent board of regents, but there needs to be some way that we know that they are seeing the evidence, that they can make an informed decision. Most people who want to get this, many, not most, many who want it just want a little gold star, so later if they run for office, I was once a regent, or maybe some business connection or something like that. It's not a paid position, by the way, I'll say that. Maybe it should be a paid position and then make it serious. Does that make sense? And people say, well, that costs money. It costs less than having it not function. School boards.
Okay.
That's the key thing too. You want local control? School boards. You need to pay attention to who's on your school board. And the school board's concern can't be, well, you know, what's your main concern? Well, my kid didn't get enough game time this season. And that's why some people run for school board. Or a launching position for something else.
That's our school board.
Everything should be local. You've got to do this type of stuff. Now, there are some other, I'll mention one last thing, then I'll shut my mouth, because I can answer questions too. But there are some things that could be done, that could be done right now that would make people more accountable. And we saw previously, it's about how the money's allotted, right? People are interested in that. So here's the thing. We already see that schools are following the money. If they're losing students, that puts them on notice. Now that's a way of actually having accountability.
Does it really put them on notice?
Here's what you could do, and let me explain why it could.
Okay.
This would be difficult, okay? I'm a historian. Historian is really good at telling you what will not work. I can't tell you what will work. I can tell you if it's not gonna work. So this I could be wrong on. I'm just saying this is something to maybe check. Maybe public schools, maybe K through 12's funding formula should be closer aligned to what you have in universities. So what I mean by that? Making it hour-based, not student-based. Now why would that work? This would be an advantage for public schools and homeschools. How? Okay, let's say you're a homeschooler and you're thinking, well, I don't know much about physics, but I'd like for my kid to take a physics class. You could send them that physics class at the public schools. You don't have to do the whole school, it's just one class. And the school would receive a certain percentage because, oh, that class has this many hours, they get this much funding. You following me?
Right.
Now, this is an advantage for homeschoolers, as I just said. It's an advantage to public schools as well. Why? Public schools are terrified about losing funds, losing students. But, hey, we can get some of those homeschoolers and some of these people because we have a dynamite class here. On the other hand, if you've got somebody who's pushing the crap like that JT was talking about earlier, students, parents are going to go, I'm not going to deal with that.
Right.
I'm pulling out of that class.
Right.
And what's going to happen is those classes aren't going to have students. The classes that are doing stuff where things are really being taught,
Right.
those will have more. And then you can follow the money. Does that make sense?
Right.
Something like that might work. Might be kind of difficult to do, but I think it'd be worth doing. Things like that. You've got to figure out how to reward things that work
Right,
in things that don't.
right,
Because it's harder if we try to dictate exactly what the curriculum is.
Right.
Because then who dictates that?
right. It goes
Well, the
back
accreditation,
to
well, okay.
and the textbooks
That's right.
and
It's
the-
better if we can figure out if parents can vote with their feet.
Mhm.
And I think that would probably work the best. And again, I know some public schools that would do well in this. There are some that do very well still, and people would go to those.
You have given some amazing information. Oh my goodness. I could have gone to would just had you speak.
Yeah.
Well, and I will say one other thing too, accountability. You need to know what's being taught in there. As a professor, I have always allowed every student to record any class. Thinking, aren't you afraid you get in trouble? Maybe, sometimes, especially when the technology don't work, I curse a lot then. But anyways, so yes, but my thing is this, I said, the thing is you can tape anything, but if you let anybody listen, you've got to post the whole thing.
Well, that's good.
In other words, not just 3 minutes. 3 minutes
Right,
will get you in
right.
trouble, the whole thing.
Right.
And then right now we have some, with the COVID for a little while, we went hybrid, so some stuff was online.
Right.
And I would have these people that I didn't know, and that I'd run in town, be a person, be like in their 80s, and they would say, "You're Dr. Crowley, how do you know?" "I was watching that with my grandson." Okay. I told them, okay, you can watch anything you want publicly, but make sure people see the whole class. Okay, not
Right.
part of it. Okay. But yeah, but that's accountability, things like that.